All right, so here we go. So with this particular part now, we're picking up where we just left off. We've got kind of this weird Frankenstein patchwork kind of looking fella. He's got some weird kind of squares all over him of different colors, and this definitely is not a finished piece, but we're going to go ahead and start finishing it. And really, there's going to be a couple tips and tricks that are going to make your life so much easier. So one, you can actually rotate the screen. Look at that. Just by taking my trackpad, if you're working on like a laptop, I can actually click and rotate just like it would if I was on your cell phone or something. If you don't like that rotation, you can always hit escape and it will click right back again. So there you go. That looks pretty good. I don't want you to think about blending. Right? If you know Photoshop a little bit, then you know that there is absolutely a smudge tool, and it just doesn't really do what you think it should do. It's just not as potent or powerful. There are other options, of course, that we can kind of play with, but really it's just not what we're looking for. Another direction that we could go is I can kind of grab these different colors that I have. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. I can grab these different colors that I have, and what happens if I wanted to blend them, but instead of using that smudge tool, again, you can see it just doesn't really do what you want it to do. Instead, what if I were to try something different? So there's two different routes that we can go. One that I'm going to highly encourage you for, and then one that you could experiment with too. If you click and hold on your paintbrush, you'll see that there's a mixer brush right there. And this kind of mixer brush is going to allow me to literally blend as if these were actual hunks of paint sticking onto an actual canvas. So if you're more of a traditional painter, this mixer brush might be more in line with how you think. And you'll see that I can literally just kind of smudge these colors around, and they'll start mixing and blending and kind of pulling into each other a little bit. Now, there's a couple ways that you can adjust this. So more towards the top here, you see again, I can kind of change my overall flow. I can kind of mix and match how these paints are kind of blending and interacting with each other. And every time that you change these numbers, it's going to affect how the paint is kind of blending and smudging together on the screen. It's always going to have that kind of heavy kind of oil paint kind of feel to it. It's as if you're pushing these colors along. Personally, I won't lie, I don't really like painting this way. I find that as I paint, if I use the mixer brush, it often ends up feeling a little bit less modeled, a little less three-dimensional, feels kind of like overly blended. It's just not my personal taste. It doesn't really work for me. But again, I still highly encourage you, play around, mix, and see what ends up happening. You might be surprised with what you're able to come up with. Okay, so switching gears slightly. So I'm going to jump in and start painting around kind of the side of his face here. And I'm going to use that Alt Option eyedropper to kind of steal some colors from the side. But notice that for me personally, I find it's much more easy if I stick with the regular paintbrush. I go through and adjust with my opacity and my flow. Using those two levers, I'm going to get to something that feels almost like I'm kind of lightly airbrushing. It's going to be very soft. You still want to have a hard-edged brush. I know that feels kind of counterintuitive, that you feel like you should have a soft-edged brush with a softer opacity, but stick with it. A harder-edged brush with a lower opacity is going to give you the kind of blending, that softness that you're really going for, because I can always click again and again and again and add more and more paint to the canvas. I'm jumping back and forth between using that Alt Option eyedropper, grabbing a new kind of mixed up color, and blending back and forth, back and forth. So this is how you're going to get that kind of soft blended look, where it still feels like it's been painted. It still feels structured and modeled. It still feels three-dimensional. Almost like a sculpture, like something you could reach out and touch, as opposed to something that's been overly blended and just kind of looks like a big old blob. So as I'm using this technique here, I'm going to go ahead and click it into kind of fast forward mode, and let's take a look at what I'm able to